Hello and welcome to Watches with Dennis, and today we are going to discuss Seiko pricing, a topic that I know a lot of people end up discussing, especially in today's world where it feels like the pricing on any given Seiko reference that comes out is random. But I've often said when people ask me about this and joke about this with me, about how these prices work, that there is some method to the madness, or I've always assumed there is, and I've always assumed it's been based on the movement. So I decided to actually do an analysis and see if that in fact is true, if I just had the impression that the more basic the movement, the cheaper the pricing is with Seiko. So let's go ahead and let's dive into this. And the first thing we need to do is define what sort of movements we're using. There are a lot of different movements. They live in several families with Seiko. And I obviously didn't have the time or inclination to try and analyze the entire current production Seiko catalog. So what I did is I went to seikowatches.com. All of the pricing information comes from there. And I ran with three movements. I ran with the 4R35, I ran with the 6R35, and I ran with the 8L35. So the graph you currently see here is some line charts showing you those three movements and the pricing of all of the current Seiko catalog models on seikowatches.com that exist with those movements. Now, the counts here are what the length of the x-axis is. So as you can see, I had more 6R35 watches than any other. There were 50 that were currently active on the website, whereas for 4R35, there were 36. Actually, there were 39. However, there are only 36 on the chart because 3 of them are yet to be released watches, and they did not actually have pricing available, but they did have pages for the models, so they showed up in the search. And then for the 8L35, there were 16 available reference numbers. So this is all well and good, but what does it mean to be a 4R or an 8L or a 6? What do all those mean? And it depends a little bit in terms of the number before the letter generally tells you the quality of the movement. Generally speaking, with Seiko, the higher up we go with that first number, the better the movement quality is. But what that means specification-wise varies. So the first thing to know is the reason why I went with these three particular movements is they are all time plus date only. So that's part of the reason why there are so few 4R35s, because as many Seiko aficionados know, the 4R36, which is a day date movement, actually is really popular at that lower price point. Seiko does a lot more models with that, I think, than this 4R35. I didn't actually do a side-by-side numeric count, but it seems like most of the time when I see like a Seiko 5 come out, there are 4R36, not a 4R35. But for my apples-to-apples purposes, I went ahead and used the 35 because when I went to the higher end, it got a lot more common just to have dates rather than day dates. So anyway, maybe more detail than any of you cared about, but that's the reason why I made that decision. So here is some specification information regarding these movements, but it's pretty straightforward. The 4R35 is a 3 Hz movement, as is the 6R35, whereas the 8L35 actually runs at a faster beat rate. It runs at 4 Hz. The power reserve is the one instance where going upstream isn't always better. So it's approximately a 40-hour power reserve on the 4R35. It's a 70-hour approximate power reserve on the 6R35, and the 8L35 drops us back down to 50 hours of power reserve, roughly. The main differentiating factor that I think is of interest to most people who are actually trying to buy the watch is the accuracy. So Seiko, and a lot of people note that Seiko accuracy is often better than what the movement is advertised to be, but officially, the 4R35 movement is said to operate at a range of minus 35 to plus 45 seconds per day. The 6R35 is minus 15 to plus 25 seconds per day, and the 8L35 is minus 10 to plus 15 seconds per day. So based off of that in particular, more so than anything else, you see where Seiko is conveying that a 6R is better than a 4R and an 8L is better than both. So let's go ahead and go back to a graph, but not the one I showed you earlier, because those lines that I provided, while they were showing each individual reference, I just didn't have them all labeled out. You could kind of tell from that, I think, if you looked closely, that none of those lines actually intersected. And that's the piece of information that this movement analysis shows that I thought was really interesting, because I thought there would be overlap. But I have another graph for you that I will put up now, which actually does a much better job of showing you the price range by movement. So here you can see that in no instance on the current catalog, retail prices applied, does a 4R35 movement cost as much as or into the range of the 6R35. And the 6R35 movements are all outside of the range of getting into what the starting 8L35 movements go for. So in terms of more specificity, the range currently, and this is all developed in June 2024, that Seiko had on SeikoWatches.com for the 4R35 references that were for sale was $300 at the cheapest to $625 at the highest. This does include limited editions because they showed up in the search. So I did not segregate anything out. If it showed a reference number when I searched a particular movement and there was a price available, it ended up in my spreadsheet. Going to the 6R35 range, that started at $725 and went all the way up to $1,550 at the highest end. So the most expensive 4R35 is still $100 less than the least expensive 6R35 currently on SeikoWatches.com. And then, jumping up yet again to the 8L35, that started at $2,600 and ranged up to $4,600. So, the difference between the most expensive 6R35 and the least expensive 8L35 was $1,050. You've probably already been able to figure out the spreads based off of me saying the minimums and maximums, but if you want them just explicitly stated, for 4R35, the price range is $325 across the various models. For the 6R35, that price range is $825. And for the 8L35, that price range is $2,000. A lot of this variance comes down to what the type of watch is. A lot of these watches are Prospex watches, but the lower end in particular, you got a lot more variety in the references. Some of these are more dress watches or have certain other aesthetic differences that come into play. So there are various other factors that get beyond the movements that also do influence the pricing. Now, what surprised me the most, as we discussed with that prior graph, is there was absolutely no overlap. While I have always told people that it's my understanding if you want to guess a price on a Seiko, knowing the movement is the key thing, and this does verify that, at least with this snapshot of very similar time plus date only movements, the thing that surprised me is I still thought there was overlap. I really thought that we would see some 4R35 movements that were above the starting price for the 6R35s. And that is not the case. They're close. I mean, they're within $100, but close is not overlap. And there was not overlap. And obviously that gap between 6R35 and 8L35 got even more significant in terms of dollars. It was over $1,000 difference. So I think all that is to say, while it does often feel random, especially if we start comparing differences in the model lines that run on a particular type of movement, and there are other movements in these families, the 4 family, the 6 family, the 8 family. They do have other types of mechanisms in play, complications, chronographs, if they're going to have days in addition to dates, and all the rest of it. So obviously, a full-throated analysis of everything on the Seiko's website is the only way to truly know. But it gets a little tricky because I feel you have to compare chronograph to chronograph. All the complications should be the same. Otherwise, it's getting a little too murky. I think there are too many variables, but that's just my take on it. But just using this, which had a lot of watches available for consideration when we add all 3 of the movements together, I was really surprised that there was absolutely no overlap. So I think the impression I had and the impression others have of that overlap stems from 2 things. One, we're just wrong, which, I mean, yes, I was just wrong. But I think the other thing is we often kind of forget when we see prices online, we're not always seeing the MSRP, the official SeikoWatches.com list price. We're remembering what we see when we look on Amazon and on eBay. We're remembering gray market prices, which can be a lot less. We know official retailers can sell beneath the list price, sometimes only after a really short period of time for Seiko. So I think it's those aspects where we'll often think about some instance where a 6R movement watch gets discounted and it's cheaper than what we remember the MSRP was for some other 4R watch. And that's kind of where we go with those assumptions. But it does seem, looking at Seiko's website, that they really are trying to be much more explicit, and using just movement, you can find price categories, and those categories do not like to overlap when it comes to having the same complications across the movement families. But anyway, That's my analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do give the video a like. It does help my channel out. You'll be notified when I have new videos. Just click subscribe, comment your thoughts, and other than that, I will talk to you all on the next video. Have a great day.